Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ102, Introduction to Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Online. Tonight's lecture is going to be covering Chapter 5, Policing in a Post-911 Society. Now, before we get started, just a quick reminder, don't forget to go through your key terms, which are located at the beginning of each chapter, and then also don't forget to look at the discussion questions which are located at the end of each chapter. And as in other chapters, I am going to skip past the learning objectives to this photograph and let you kind of look at this picture for a moment before we get started on our lecture tonight. So now that you've had a second to look at it, here we go. Although recent events have underscored the value that a community policing approach can bring to police agencies and citizens alike, there is no avoiding the reality that a job of a police officer will always require a degree of traditional professional policing, such as rapid response to emergency calls for service and reactive investigations. Now, after 9/11, however, a new type of policing emerged, and this is what they call data-driven or intelligence-led policing. And this new type of policing, data-driven and intelligence-led policing, emerged as a direct result of those 9/11 terrorist attack. And the framework of policing has expanded from basically a domestic focus to more of a international focus. And the events of 9/11 impacted the organizational development of state and local law enforcement agencies, resulting in a renewed focus on community policing and what they call PSP, or problem-solving polices, and also on other data-driven type models. Now, community policing transcends discrete actions such as leaving a squad car to walk a beat on foot or helping a homeless citizen find shelter. It encompasses a broad understanding, acceptance, and implementation of policies and training that are rooted in procedural justice, which is vital to the building of mutual trust and cooperation between police and their citizens. And these five broad strategic or organizational approaches currently operating in contemporary policing today are what we just kind of talked about: community policing, problem-solving policing, or PSP as we kind of call it for short, CompStat policing, intelligence-led policing, and evidence-based policing. Now, a little bit of fact or myth here. So the myth is that community policing is soft on crime. And I think that some people really do think that community policing is a little bit soft on crime, but to be quite honest with you, it's the opposite. The fact is, the philosophy behind community policing is to work in partnership with the community to effectively deter crime and solve problems. And that focus causes the police and the citizens to address underlying problems and actively engage in a way to address them. And typically when you address the underlying problems, you're going to get rid of that particular issue that keeps reoccurring and reoccurring, if that kind of makes sense. So it's not really soft on crime like people really think it is. Now, since the 1980s, community policing has been the dominant innovation in American policing. And although community policing is no longer considered, I'm not going to say cool, but innovative, it is nonetheless still a hot topic. And as I stated earlier, community policing transcends or goes beyond, okay, discrete actions like leaving a squad car to walk a foot beat or helping a homeless person. There's a lot more to it. And there's an author, Cassidy, that kind of said it like this. When an agency claims to have implemented community policing last week, that's a pretty good indication that it has not. Individual programs or projects that form part of this change may be implemented, but community policing is not implemented. It's a process that evolves, it develops, it takes root and grows until it is an integral part of the formal and informal value system of both the police and the community as a whole. So you can see that you don't just like implement community policing, it is this organizational philosophy, and it has a lot of primary elements in order to get implemented. And again, it doesn't happen basically overnight. So it encompasses a broad understanding, acceptance, and implementation of policies and training that are truly rooted in procedural justice, which is vital to building mutual trust and cooperation between police and citizens. And there are three larger elements, if you will, at the heart of community policing. And those are partnerships, which would be community partnerships, problem solving, and organizational transformation. And the two key elements at the heart of community policing are going to be those community partnerships and that problem solving portion that I just spoke of. And the way that community policing kind of works and some of the primary foundations of it can be found under what they call the SARA model. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but this is what the SARA model stands for, so you can get kind of an idea of what it is right away. So the first one under S would be scanning, and that's identifying and prioritizing problems. And the next one would be analysis, which is researching what is known as the problem. And response would be developing solutions to bring about lasting reductions in the number and extent of whatever problem it is that you are dealing with. And then finally, you have assessment, which is evaluating the success of the responses that you got. And when you talk about the importance of community policing, you are going to have to look at this entire thing as basically a organizational transformation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this transformation in a minute. But community has many definitions, and it may have and can refer to a social group or class having common interests. Community may even refer to society as a whole, the public. And this text uses a specific, admittedly simplistic meaning for community. And community refers to that specific geographic area served by a police department or law enforcement agency and the individuals, organizations, and agencies that are within that area. And police officers must understand and be part of, not apart from, this defined community if they really are to fulfill their mission. And also of importance are the individual values, concerns, and cultural principles of the people living and working in that community and the common interest that they share with their neighbors. Now, as part of this organizational transformation, because we're going to have to do this in order to implement contemporary community policing, we have to understand a couple of different things. And the first one would be what we call implicit bias. And this is the unintentional, subconscious associations every individual makes among groups of people and stereotypes about those groups. So I thought it was kind of cool to use like law enforcement, because you're all stereotyping, okay, because you all think that we eat donuts. So that's why I put this picture here. Now, it doesn't matter that most of us do, or that specifically I do, but again, this is a organizational transformation. So we have to get away from some of these things like implicit bias, meaning that subconscious association that usually people make among groups of people, and stereotypes on those groups of people as well. So here's kind of a chart that's in your textbook that shows the primary elements of community policing. And you can see the three circles in the middle that talk about organizational transformation and community partnerships and problem solving. And you can look at each piece because they outline them for us so we can figure these out. So if you were to look here at community partnerships, you can see this goes up to government agencies, community members and groups, nonprofits and service providers, private businesses, and yes, even the media. And the organizational transformation, meaning like when we look at agency management, the climate and culture, what type of leadership do we have, strategic planning, policies, transparency, the organizational structure, personnel, recruitment, hiring, selection. I'm sure you're seeing that there's a lot more to this now. And then even information systems and technology. And this is all under the organizational transformation piece. And then the problem solving piece. Well, how do we solve problems? Well, we're going to do that using the SARA model that's been outlined for us. And it's easier once you get it going. I know it probably looks a little bit confusing right now, but that's a really good chart on how all those three integral pieces kind of work together in order to fulfill the community policing function. Now, we talked a minute ago about the importance of community, and it never hurts to kind of reiterate it. Community has many definitions. And again, it can refer to a social group or class having common interests. Community can even refer to a society as a whole, like the public. Community also refers to the specific geographic area served by the police department or law enforcement agency, and all of those individuals, organizations, and agencies that fall within that area. Now, the importance of community brings to light this phrase called social capital. Now, communities might also be looked at in terms of their social capital, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but stay with me for a minute. A concept developed by Coleman in 1990 and defined as a variety of different entities having two characteristics in common. That they all consist of this of the same aspect of social structure, and that they facilitate certain actions of individuals who are within that structure. So this social capital, again, kind of interesting. Let me give you another definition of it so we can kind of stay consistent. The bond, this is a different one. The bond among family members and their immediate informal groups, as well as the networks tying individuals to broader community institutions such as schools, civic organizations, and churches, and to various levels of government. Now, Coleman says it this way: communities might also be looked at in terms of their social capital. That concept, again, defined as a variety of different entities having two characteristics in common. They all consist of some aspect of a social structure, and they facilitate certain actions of individuals who are within that structure. Now, social capital exists at two different levels, at the local level and the public level. And that's important for us to know. Local social capital is the bond among family members and their immediate informal groups. Now, public social capital refers to the networks tying individuals to broader community institutions such as schools, civic organizations, churches, and the like. So hopefully that kind of helped you separate those out from just the generic definition of social capital. Along with that, there's another individual who did something very unique, and I can't remember if I covered it, so I'm going to cover it now. Putnam's 2000 exploration of social capital in America, titled Bowling Alone, described a drastic decline in league bowling and proposed that this seemingly minor observation actually reflected a striking drop in social capital and civic engagement, and it was basically dubbed the bowling alone phenomenon. In the United States, that had begun in the 1960s. And the article caused fierce academic debate and prompted Putnam to study the issue basically in depth. And extensive research supported his central thesis that from 1960 to about the year to 2000, Americans had become increasingly isolated from friends and neighbors. So again, that bowling alone phenomenon that they talk about refers to a decline in social capital and civic engagement in the United States. Now, another kind of phrase that's out there, if you will, that is underneath this contemporary community policing umbrella would be what they call asset mapping. And asset mapping is a strategy in which an inventory of communities' resources are basically done. Individual community members, associations, organizations, institutions, businesses is created in an effort to help police break down barriers that may lead to conflicts with community members and to help with revitalization efforts. Now, a simple definition of an asset is something of value. And the central tenet of asset mapping is that all communities have value, even those plagued by poverty, unemployment, lack of affordable housing, high crime rates, and other things similar to that. So, an example of asset mapping could be done to address possibly like youth violence. And that could be one thing that you could be targeting. And another phenomenon, if you will, that's out there that's kind of in this community policing type discussion would be what they called the broken windows theory. And in a classic article, The Police and Neighborhood Safety, Broken Windows, two individuals by the name of Wilson and Keeling contend that if a neighborhood is allowed to run down, then it gives the impression that nobody cares, and because of that, crime is going to increase. So a very interesting study was done based on the broken windows theory. So in 1969, a Stanford psychologist, Mr. Philip Zimbardo, arranged to have a car without license plates parked with its hood up on a street in the Bronx, and a comparable car on a street in Palo Alto, California. Now, the car in the Bronx was attacked by vandals within 10 minutes, and within 24 hours, it had been totally destroyed and stripped of everything of value. Well, the car in Palo Alto sat untouched after a week. And after that, Zambrano took a sledgehammer to it, and then people passing by soon joined in, and then with a few hours, the car was also totally destroyed. So this study kind of shows you, although the cities are different, it does maybe lend the credence to if people see that it's okay for maybe something simplistic here like a car to get stripped, or a window to be broken, or graffiti to be thrown up on a wall, then that means that maybe nobody does care about the particular neighborhood, and it's kind of okay to do that, if you will. So again, just kind of an interesting phenomenon that takes place in that particular example that I'm giving. Now critics have also kind of been out there as it relates or directed towards the broken window theory for policing for its disproportionate impact on communities of color. Now, critics argue that the policing of minor offenses tends to impact minorities more than whites and criminalizes activities that are symptomatic of underlying issues such as like drug addiction or mental illness and homelessness, and conditions that are better addressed by, let's say, mental health professionals than by the police. Now, regardless of which side of the controversy one finds themselves on, the reality is that different communities do have different needs and require different police responses to meet those needs. And if the residents of a community place a high priority on addressing incivilities and minor crime, the police really must kind of respond accordingly. So let's talk a little bit about serving and protecting diverse populations. Well, our society has changed tremendously over the past decades, as have the challenges facing the police. Technology has certainly made the task easier, but the increased diversity of our population has in fact made it quite a bit more difficult. And demographics is a word that refers to the characteristics of the persons who live in a community and include things like population size, growth, employment rate, ethnic makeup, and vital statistics. And the community's demographic makeup is extremely important from a police community relations partnership perspective. For example, what's the average age, and are there more younger or old folks, or how many single parent families are there, and what's the common level of education, and how does the education level in those law enforcement areas compare, and what's the school dropout rate, and do gangs operate in the community, and what's the rate of homelessness. So you can see that it's important to know all of these things, and all of these vital statistics certainly play a role in what we're talking about. And this slide kind of talks about what I just went over. So we know that the community's demographic makeup is a very, very important issue when it comes to that police citizen partnership. So what is the importance then of community under community policing? Well, it involves educating citizens, and it involves involving the citizens. So community members have they have a great interest in their local police departments, and it's been that way, and they've been involved in cities and police departments for years in a variety of different ways. And sometimes they're involved in what we call civilian review boards. And civilian review boards have been used in the United States since, let's say, the mid-50s. And a civilian review board consists of citizens who meet to review complaints filed against police departments or even against individual officers. Now, the movement for citizen review boards has been a kind of a political struggle for more than 50 years and really has remained one of the most controversial issues in police work today, because there are people that support those and there are people that don't. Opponents of civilian review boards stress that civilians really can't understand the complexities of the police profession, and that it is kind of demeaning, if you will, to be reviewed by someone that doesn't really understand. Citizen patrols, that would be another way to involve your community. And community policing is rooted in law enforcement's dependence on the public's eyes and ears for information and influence to exert social control. And citizen patrols are not new. They've been established in many, many communities, and they are extremely, extremely helpful, and they are, in fact, the eyes and ears of many, many police departments. And then finally, citizen police academies. Another type of community involvement is through what we call citizen police academies, designed to familiarize citizens with law enforcement and to keep the department in touch with the community. And police academies, although popular with police department and citizens, have their benefits, and sometimes they have their drawbacks. But the benefits in building community support for law enforcement and really helping citizens understand the police are some of the two biggest aspects of those citizen police academies. Forming community partnerships are very important as well, but I skipped something that I wanted to kind of touch on. Some communities and some departments have ride-along programs, and ride-along programs are very popular, but yet sometimes they're a little controversial when you talk about improving police community relations. And these programs are designed to give local citizens a close-up look at the realities of police work and what the police really do, while giving the officers a chance to connect with the citizen in a positive way. Now, I can say that while the text here talks about it being a little bit controversial, yes, I mean, in some places it might be, but in the city where I came from, ride-alongs were a great opportunity to connect with citizens and to really show them how difficult law enforcement can be, and talk about those things kind of on a one-on-one basis. So staying under the importance of community would be developing partnerships. Now, community partnerships are crucial for police agencies serious about community policing. So community policing cannot succeed without them. Collaborations may be with private businesses, schools, youths, residents, volunteer organizations, community groups, faith-based organizations, FBOs, the media, private security, nonprofits, service providers, and other government agencies, depending upon the problem and who the stakeholders are. And partnerships usually result in a more effective solution to the problem because of the shared responsibility, resources, and goals. They also foster a shared feeling of ownership through having a vested interest in the matter. And police-public partnerships exist on two levels. On a more passive level, the community assumes a compliant role and shows support for law and order by what they basically do not do. They do not interfere with routine police activities, and they do not themselves engage in conduct that disrupts the public peace. Now, on an active level, citizens step beyond their daily law-abiding lives and get directly involved in projects and programs and other specific efforts to enhance their community safety. Now, such participation may include neighborhood watch, or neighborhood blocks as they call them, citizen patrols, and youth-oriented educational programs and recreation programs, and all those really cool things that come with it. And as we're talking about the importance of community, and we're talking about, well, how do we kind of get there, and how do we establish those things? Well, again, remember, community policing is this whole, it's a philosophy, and there's a lot of pieces that kind of go into this philosophy, and you're going to have to change your entire management style and your organizational style perhaps as well. So before we jump into this, and I know I covered the other stuff really quick, a couple of things to really hit on when we talk about those partnerships that we talked about. Some of the bigger ones that are out there would be partnerships with private security. Now, in years past, much competition and animosity existed between public and private, private police, if you will, and public law enforcement officers regarded private security kind of as wannabes, and those in the private sector considered public officers kind of, ego-inflated crime fighters who often held themselves kind of above the law. But recently, these two groups have really learned to work together to ensure the common goal of public safety. And then we talked about youth and law enforcement partnerships. So any successful community policing effort, you have to include building positive relationships with youth. And research has found that negative perceptions of the police among minority youth are often grounded in personal experiences with aggressive law enforcement in communities of color, and have been linked to an increase in willingness to break the law and a general overall distrust of the police, and even a refusal to cooperate with officers. Now, one of the most logical places for police to start in any endeavor in building community trust and cooperation with youth, of course, there are a lot of different programs that you can implement, but one good one would be putting officers in schools. They would call them SROs. And these SRO programs have become an important way for police to fulfill their duty to protect children while on campus and contribute to a safer learning environment. And that specialized role of SRO we'll talk a little bit about later on in a couple other chapters. And then finally, the one I wanted to hit on that's really important is the partnership with the media. Now, the media can be a super powerful tool or an ally, and a formidable opponent, in implementing a community policing philosophy. Now, the press can shape public opinion, and most police agencies are concerned about their public image. And positive publicity can enhance both image and the efforts of a department. And conversely, negative publicity can be extremely damaging. Therefore, police agencies can and should make every effort to build those positive working relationships and partnerships with the media. Now, the police and the media have this interesting relationship. It's called a symbiotic relationship, where they basically mutually depend on each other. The police and the members of the media share a common goal of serving the public. And because of that, they have this interesting relationship. Police departments and individual officers rely on the press to disseminate vital public safety information to the community and to reach out to the community for help. And at the same time, reporters rely on the police to provide information to their readers and their viewers. So you can see it's not just, you don't just implement this community policing thing in like 5 minutes and you're ready to go. There's a lot more to it, including where we're going to go right now, which would be changes in management style and organization. So community policing usually requires a different management style. And the traditional autocratic style of effective leadership during the industrial age, isn't going to have that same effect on those in the 21st century. And what we're talking about really is the implementation of something called participatory leadership, which is where each individual has a voice in decisions, but of course, top management retains the ultimate decision-making authority. So the leader must also have a vision for the department and the community. And this vision should include the essential elements of that community policing philosophy, problem solving and empowering people and forming community partnerships to be proactive, making preventing crime as important as enforcing the law. Now that's a big shift in different styles of the way that we typically do things, and I hope that kind of makes sense to everybody. Now, changes in the organization usually include a couple of things that I'm going to go through really quick, and then we'll look at some impediments to community policing. So some changes that need to be done. The organization needs to be flattened and decentralized a bit, and roles of those in management positions change to being leaders and mentors rather than direct managers and supervisors. And patrol officers are given new responsibilities and are empowered to make decisions and problem solve and work with their community partners. And permanent shifts in areas of assignment are implemented so they get to know people in their particular districts. And decentralization reduces the number of specialized units channeling more resources toward the direct delivery of police services to the public. Teams improve efficiency and effectiveness by pooling officer resources. And civilianization to some extent replaces sworn personnel with non-sworn personnel to maximize cost effectiveness. So reassigning sworn personnel to where they are really most needed. Now that might sound just pretty logical when you think about it, but this is part of that whole management change that has to take place when you're talking directly about community policing. Well, what are the benefits really quick before we get into the pitfalls? Well, the benefits of implementing community policing there's a lot, both to the department and to the community at large. Community policing brings police closer to the people, building relationships between police and community and among community members themselves. Now, as police interaction with the community becomes more positive, productive partnerships are formed, and the community and officer leadership skills are developed. And then citizens begin to see that problems actually have solutions, giving them courage to go out and tackle other community issues. And as citizens feel more empowered to get involved, prevention and detection of crime increases, leading to reduced fear of crime in the community and an overall improved quality of life. Now that just it might sound kind of like a politician, but really it's true. This community policing does kind of catch on and start to permeate throughout organizations and really makes your department quite a bit more efficient. And so now let's look at some organizational impediments, meaning like what are those things that might get in the way of community policing? Well, one could be union impediments, meaning resistance to change or fear of losing control to the community, or resistance to increased officer responsibility. Community impediments could be things like community resistance community concern that COP or community policing is soft on crime and what have you. What about transition impediments? Being able or balancing increased foot patrol activities while maintaining um, emergency response time, and all of these are some impediments that could be there. And um, and then finally the evaluation part about how do you evaluate some of these things, and we're going to talk about the Sarah model. Now, when we talk about this thing called integrated patrol, before we move on, uh, community policing and aggressive enforcement, kind of a balanced approach, if you will. So it doesn't mean that you really can't do, you have to just do this one thing through community policing. You can balance this. You can have community policing and aggressive enforcement based on what your need is, and it is more of a balanced approach, and that's kind of what they call integrated patrol. So now we're going to kind of look at the evaluation under the Sarah system, and we're also going to tackle this thing called problem-solving policing. So what if you were an officer moonlighting as private security? What would be your biggest concern? Kind of an interesting discussion question. So let's look at problem-solving policing. And if you're following along, it's on page 186, and we're going to kind of look at the difference. So problem-solving policing and community policing are sometimes equated. However, they're really not synonymous, okay? Problem-solving policing, or PSP, is an essential strategy of community policing. Its focus is on determining the underlying causes of problems, including crime, and identifying the solution. So under this, the key elements here: a problem rather than a crime, case, call, or incident, is the basic unit of police work. A problem is something that concerns or causes harm to citizens, not just police. Things that concern only police officers are important, but they are not problems in this sense of the term. And addressing problems means more than quick fixes. It means dealing with conditions that create problems. So again, we're talking about key elements of problem-solving policing. Police officers must routinely and systematically analyze problems before trying to solve them, just as they routinely and systematically investigate crimes before making an arrest. Individual officers and the department as a whole must develop routines and systems for analyzing problems. The analysis of problems must be thorough, although it may not be, it doesn't have to be complicated. And this principle is as true for a problem analysis as it is for a criminal investigation. So now we're on key element number 3. Problems must be described precisely and accurately and broken down into specific aspects. Problems often are not what they first appear to be. Problems must be understood in terms of various interests at stake. Individuals and groups of people are affected in different ways by a problem and should have different ideas about what should be done about that problem. And key element 4, the way the problem is currently being handled must be understood, and the limits of effectiveness must be openly acknowledged in order to come up with a better response. Initially, any and all possible responses to a problem should be considered so as not to cut short potential effective responses. Suggested responses should follow from what is learned during the analysis, and they should not be limited to nor ruled out the use of an arrest. So you have to kind of think about that as well. And key element number 5, police must proactively try to solve problems rather than just react to the harmful consequences. The police department must increase police officers' freedom to make or participate in important decisions. At the same time, officers must be held accountable for their decision making. And also, the effectiveness of new responses must be evaluated so these results can be shared with the other police officers, and the department can work systematically to learn what works and doesn't work. And this is the actual SARA model of problem solving. So I know that was a lot, but those are what they call the 5 key areas when it comes to problem solving policing. And the SARA model, we talked about it earlier. This is the model that is used in problem solving: scanning, analyzing, responding, and assessing, and also process the evaluation, and also the impact of the evaluation. So this is a 4-stage strategy used in problem-oriented policing: scan, analyze, respond, and assess. So question 2, are the SARA model improvements cost effective? And again, you'll have to have probably read the chapter to really understand whether or not they're cost effective or not. So now we're going to finish up with a couple of different types of things that we heard at the very beginning. So we've talked a ton about community policing, and there's a lot more to it. Okay, so there's totally a lot more to it, but I want to make sure that we have the time to get through a lot of different things. Now, when we talked a lot about problem-solving policing, and if you look at page 188 in your textbook, before we kind of move on, you'll see the key elements of problem-solving policing. And again, they're all listed all the way down in that book, and you don't have to know them all, but you'll see again the key elements there. And then on page 189, you can look at the SARA model of problem solving, and this is the SARA model of PSP is a model that is still considered essential, or an essential element of community policing today. So now what about barriers though? So we talked about barriers to community policing. Let me throw this out really quick about barriers to problem solving. So several challenges exist to implementing a PSP model. It can be costly. It takes a lot of time, many months to years to fully execute. And it's often difficult to measure the true outcome of the efforts made. Officers and police administration may not agree on what a problem really is. And perhaps the biggest barrier to using the problem-solving model is getting the police officers on board, open to adopting the mindset that problems are not just those things that are of concern to the police, but also those incidents or conditions that are of concern to the community. So you can see it can be a little bit difficult. Now, as we finish up on the data-driven strategies to policing, and we kind of opened with that, and we're going to close with that. So as has been stressed or talked about earlier, law enforcement agencies are expected to combat crime, but are also asked to look at causes for problems existing within communities and address them as well. And much of this depends on data-driven approaches to policing. So the first one we're going to look at is going to be CompStat, and we're not going to go into great detail, but CompStat policing is a method of management accountability and a philosophy of crime control. Now, the essence of CompStat, which is short for computer statistics or comparison statistics, is that police cannot manage what they do not measure. And CompStat is kind of like pin mapping on steroids. It simply helps to draw sharp attention to problem areas. It puts facts in the place of impressions, And CompStat was fully operational in 1994 in the New York Police Department and quickly gained popularity. So it is a method of management accountability and a philosophy of crime control. And it has four principles: accurate and timely intelligence, effective tactics, rapid deployment, and relentless follow-up and assessment. And what about intelligence-led policing? Well, the connection between CompStat and intelligence-led policing is obvious in that the first principle of CompStat, or the CompStat process, is accurate, timely intelligence. And when information is gathered and analyzed, it becomes intelligence, not just information anymore. Now, there was a time in policing when intelligence was just considered like clandestine, obtained from confidential informants, and secrecy and siloing of information were common practices. However, the events of September 11th changed that view considerably, and information sharing is now expected, and competent analysis of this information to provide to law enforcement the intelligence they need to keep our communities safe is really what intelligence-led policing is kind of all about. So it's collaborative law enforcement approach combining problem solving, policing, information sharing, and police accountability with enhanced intelligence operations. And there's two things that come into mind here, which would be like tactical intelligence, which is information that is analyzed and contributes directly to a specific incident, and then strategic intelligence, where information is analyzed that evolves and kind of develops over time. So the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, which BGA for short, defines intelligence-led policing as a collaborative law enforcement approach combining problem-solving policing, information sharing, and police accountability with enhanced intelligence operations. And that's the intelligence-led policing. And then if you look here, you can see the kind of intelligence cycle that they use when we're talking about intelligence-led policing. Now, against the backdrop of budget cuts and the all too familiar discussions about do more with less, the intelligence-led policing approach does allow law enforcement to maximize the use of available resources and partnerships, such as those capabilities available through both state and local fusion centers and local and regional intelligence center. And a fusion center is basically a collaborative effort of two or more agencies that provide resources, expertise, and information to the center with the goal of maximizing their ability to detect, prevent, investigate, and respond to criminal terrorist activity. So you can see there's a lot going on with these different things there. And then another policing theory, if you will, that kind of came on board not too long ago would be evidence-based policing. And this is the use of the best available research on the outcomes of police work to implement guidelines and evaluate agencies, units, and officers. And basically it involves partnering with universities and basically looking at police practices and using scientific evidence to see what works and what doesn't work. And I know we're running out of time, but let's see if this link works, because if it does, it'll be cool. And here is basically a video from the Society of Evidence-Based Policing. And I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to actually back out of it. But the Rialto Police Department not too long ago was involved in an evidence-based policing project that dealt with body cameras. And as a result, we were lucky enough to be recognized by the Society of Evidence-Based Policing. But again, kind of going back to the beginning, it is the use of best available research on the outcomes of police work. So what we did is we did a study on body cameras to determine whether or not they would actually function the way people thought they would. And if they did, were they worth buying? And did they reduce complaints and instances of use of force and different things? And at the end of the day, the answer would be yes. So kind of cool. Well, what about data-driven theories or what have you for traffic safety? Well, another model to consider in this discussion of data-driven policing is what we call data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety, DDAX for short. And this uses geomapping to collect crime and crash information, and working with the community members and using strategic intelligence to fight and reduce traffic safety. So there's another kind of really cool thing. And then finally, predictive policing. Predictive policing, that process involves a four-stage cycle. It includes data collection and data analysis and police intervention and target response, which then leads back to data collection, and the cycle kind of continues on and on and on. So this model, data-driven policing, is also called predictive policing, and it's also known as PredPol for short, which some contend is the next emerging era of policing. And I put a YouTube video link in here that'll take you to a video about predictive policing, and I believe it's the Los Angeles Police Department that does it, and it's very, very cool to look at. So take a look at it. Now, predictive policing was developed by two university professors in California and first implemented by the Los Angeles Police Department as a tool to forecast where burglaries and auto theft might occur. Wow, that's kind of cool. So being able to say, hey, we think that something might occur here, that's actually really, really neat. Now, PredPol, predictive policing, this part, PredPol uses an algorithm to convert crime data into crime forecasting, similar to modeling technology used by meteorologists to predict weather events. And a fundamental premise of predictive policing is that crime is not randomly distributed across people, places, or times. Therefore, with enough big data, analysts can forecast when and where crimes might be more likely to occur. Awesome. I mean, that's just, talk about some kind of science fiction stuff, but this stuff is here, and these are things that we're using now. So go to that YouTube link and click on it, and and watch it. And I think you'll really think it's kind of cool. Now, we're going to end really quick with the Safe City program launched by Target Corporation in 2004 in Minnesota to build partnerships between local law enforcement and their communities to reduce crime. And it was a combination of traditional policing, community policing, and data-driven policing. And since then, there have started this Safe City program has started in more than 20 other cities. So it was a lot of information, I understand that, but I'm glad we were able to get through it, and we did make it under the 60-minute mark, so that's actually cool. So again, don't forget about those terms, those key terms that are at the front of your chapters, and then the discussion questions as well. Click on those links in the PowerPoint if you have time, and look at the ceremony that was actually pretty cool from the Society of Evidence-Based Policing for the project that Rialto did, and also on PredPol and that predictive policing, because think about it, being able to maybe predict crime, that's actually kind of awesome, and I never really thought it would happen perhaps in my lifetime. But for that's going to be it for your chapter 5 lecture. And of course, if you have any questions, post them on the general discussion board. And if you don't want to post them there, you can send me an email. But that's going to be it. And until